Sarah Martinez had always been an early riser. At 28, she worked as a bartender at a small coastal town called, where the salty breeze carried stories of fishermen and tourists alike. Her small apartment overlooked the harbor, and she loved watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah was walking to the local coffee shop before her shift when she heard the screech of tires behind her. 3 police cars surrounded her on the quiet street, their red and blue lights flashing like angry fireflies in the morning mist. "Sarah Martinez, you're under arrest," officer called out, stepping from the lead car with handcuffs gleaming in his hands. His voice was stern and official, cutting through the peaceful morning air like a knife. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I haven't done anything wrong." "That's what they all say," officer replied, grabbing her wrists and clicking the cold metal handcuffs into place. The sound echoed off the empty buildings around them. "You're wanted for questioning in connection with a theft at the naval base." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Naval base? She had never even been near the military installation that sat on the other side of town. She tried to explain this to the officers, but they weren't interested in listening. They guided her into the back of the police car, and she watched helplessly as her quiet neighborhood disappeared behind the tinted windows. The police station was buzzing with activity even in the early morning hours. Officers moved back and forth with coffee cups and paperwork, their voices creating a constant hum of conversation. Sarah was led to a small interrogation room with gray walls and a single table. The handcuffs remained locked around her wrists, making her shoulders ache. Detective entered the room carrying a thick file. He was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much over the years. He sat across from Sarah and opened the file, revealing photographs and documents she couldn't quite see. "Miss Martinez," he began, "someone matching your description was seen near the Naval Base Computer Center last Friday night. Security cameras caught a woman with dark hair and a red jacket. You own a red jacket, don't you?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, but I was working Friday night. You can check with my boss at Murphy's Bar. I served drinks until 2 in the morning." Detective made a note but didn't seem impressed. The theft involved classified information about ship movements and personnel schedules. "This is serious federal business, Miss Martinez. If you're involved, it's better to tell us now." The questions continued for hours. Sarah answered each one honestly, explaining her whereabouts, her job, her daily routine. She had no connection to the military, no access to computer systems, no reason to steal anything from anyone, but the detective seemed unconvinced. "The witness description matches you perfectly," he insisted. "Dark hair about your height, wearing that red jacket. The security guard was very specific." Sarah felt tears building in her eyes. "Please, you have to believe me. I'm just a bartender. I don't know anything about classified information or ship schedules. I've never even been to the naval base." As the day wore on, more officers came and went. They asked the same questions in different ways, hopping to catch her in a contradiction. Sarah's wrists were sore from the handcuffs, and her throat was dry from talking. She requested water several times, but they only brought small paper cups that barely helped. The breakthrough came when Detective received a phone call. He stepped outside the room for several minutes, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She could hear muffled voices through the door but couldn't make out the words. When he returned, his expression was more serious than before. "Miss Martinez, we've received additional information about this case. It seems the theft was more extensive than we first thought. Multiple computer terminals were accessed, and several files were. This suggests someone with inside knowledge and training." Sarah's heart sank. "But I'm telling you, I don't have any training. I barely know how to use my own laptop. You're making a huge mistake." The detective leaned forward in his chair. "Here's what I think happened. Someone hired you to get this information. Maybe they threatened you, maybe they paid you well. Either way, you're in serious trouble. Federal theft charges can mean years in prison." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Sarah had never been in trouble with the law before. She had never even gotten a speeding ticket. The idea of going to prison for something she didn't do was terrifying. "I want to call my lawyer," she said quietly. "That's your right," Detective replied. "But I should tell you, cooperation now might help your case later." Sarah shook her head. She had watched enough television shows to know that talking without a lawyer was dangerous, especially when she was innocent. I want my phone call. The detective sighed and stood up. We'll arrange that. In the meantime, you'll be transferred to a holding cell while we continue our investigation. The holding cell was small and cold, with concrete walls and a narrow bench. Sarah sat in the corner, still wearing the handcuffs, and tried to process everything that had happened. Just that morning, she had been walking to get coffee, thinking about her plans for the weekend. Now she was facing federal charges for a crime she knew nothing about. Other women came and went from the cell throughout the day. Some were there for minor offenses like shoplifting or public disturbance. They looked at Sarah with curiosity, wondering what someone so quiet and well-dressed had done to end up there. "What are you in for?" asked a woman with bleached hair and tired eyes. "They think I stole something from the naval base," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman whistled low. "That's heavy stuff. Military doesn't mess around with their security." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of her situation settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. She closed her eyes and tried to remember every detail of Friday night at the bar. Maybe there was something that could help prove her innocence. She remembered serving the regular customers, old Tom who always ordered whiskey neat, the group of college students who came in loud and left louder, the quiet businessman who sat in the corner reading his newspaper. She had cleaned glasses, wiped down tables, and counted the register at closing time. It was a perfectly ordinary night. But apparently, while she was serving drinks and making small talk with customers, someone who looked like her was breaking into the Naval Base Computer Center. The coincidence seemed impossible, but here she was, locked up and facing serious charges. As evening approached, Sarah was finally allowed to make her phone call. She dialed her sister's number with shaking fingers, hoping Maria would be home from work. "Sarah, why are you calling from a police station?" Maria's voice was filled with concern. Sarah explained everything as quickly as she could, from the morning arrest to the interrogation to the federal charges. Maria listened in shocked silence. "This is crazy," Maria said when Sarah finished. "You were at work Friday night. I'll call Murphy's bar right now and get your time records." "Please hurry," Sarah said. "They want to transfer me to federal custody tomorrow." After the call, Sarah was returned to the holding cell. She lay on the narrow bench, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her life had taken such a dramatic turn. The handcuffs were cutting into her wrists, but the guards said they couldn't remove them until she was officially processed. Night fell outside the small barred window, and the police station grew quieter. Sarah could hear the occasional radio chatter and footsteps in the hallway, but mostly it was silent. She thought about her job, her apartment, her simple life that now seemed like a distant memory. The other women in the cell had been released or transferred, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She wondered if the real thief was still out there, laughing about how someone else was taking the blame for their crime. She wondered if anyone would believe her story, if the evidence would clear her name, if she would ever get her normal life back. As she finally drifted off to sleep on the uncomfortable bench, Sarah had no idea that her salvation would come from an unexpected source, and that the small tattoo on her shoulder would soon change everything. The next morning brought new complications for Sarah Martinez. Federal agents arrived at the police station before sunrise, ready to transfer her to their facility for further questioning. Agent Collins was a serious woman in her 40s, wearing a crisp navy suit and carrying a briefcase that looked like it contained important documents. "Miss Martinez, I'm Agent Collins with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she announced as Sarah was brought from the holding cell, still wearing the handcuffs that had become painfully familiar. "You're being transferred to federal custody pending investigation of charges related to national security." Sarah's legs felt weak as she walked down the hallway. National security. The charges were getting more serious by the hour. "Agent Collins, please listen to me. I'm innocent. I was working at Murphy's bar Friday night. You can check the security cameras there, talk to my customers, verify my story." Agent Collins glanced at her clipboard. "That's exactly what we intend to do, Miss Martinez. However, the evidence against you is quite compelling. Security footage from the naval base shows a woman matching your description near the computer center around 11 p.m. Friday night." "But I was serving drinks at 11 p.m., Sarah insisted. "The bar was packed that night. At least 30 people saw me there." They walked out of the police station into the gray morning light. Sarah noticed several military vehicles parked outside, their official markings making the situation feel even more serious. Agent Collins guided her toward a black sedan with government plates. "Miss Martinez, before we transport you, there's been a request for you to meet with someone from the naval base. Admiral Harrison specifically asked to see you before formal charges are filed." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. An admiral? She had never met anyone with such a high military rank. Why would an admiral want to see me? "I'm not privy to that information," Agent Collins replied. "But Admiral Harrison has significant influence in these matters. It might be in your best interest to cooperate." The drive to the naval base took 20 minutes through winding coastal roads. Sarah had lived in her entire life, but had never been past the main gate of the military installation. The base was enormous, with clean white buildings stretching as far as she could see, and uniformed personnel walking purposefully between them. At the security checkpoint, guards examined Agent Collins' credentials and waved them through. Sarah pressed her face to the window, amazed by the massive ships docked in the harbor. Aircraft carriers and destroyers sat in the water like sleeping giants, their radar equipment and communication towers reaching toward the cloudy sky. "Impressive, isn't it?" Agent Collins commented, noticing Sarah's wide-eyed expression. "This base is home to some of the Navy's most important operations, which is why the theft of classified information is taken so seriously." They parked in front of a large administrative building with flags flying proudly in the morning breeze. Sarah was escorted inside, past walls decorated with portraits of naval heroes and display cases filled with military artifacts. Everything was spotless and professional, making her feel even more out of place in her wrinkled clothes from the holding cell. Admiral Harrison's office was on the third floor, behind a door marked with his name and rank in gold letters. His secretary, a young man in dress uniform, announced their arrival and gestured for them to enter. Admiral Harrison was not what Sarah had expected. Instead of a stern, intimidating figure, she found a man in his 60s with kind eyes and gray hair, wearing a uniform decorated with numerous ribbons and medals. He stood from behind his massive wooden desk as they entered. "Agent Collins, thank you for bringing Miss Martinez to see me," he said in a voice that was both authoritative and warm. "Miss Martinez, please have a seat." Sarah sat in the leather chair across from his desk, her handcuffed hands resting awkwardly in her lap. Admiral Harrison noticed her discomfort and turned to Agent Collins. "Agent Collins, would you mind removing Miss Martinez's restraints? I think we can manage a civilized conversation without them." Agent Collins hesitated. "Sir, she's facing serious federal charges. Protocol requires." "I'm well aware of protocol," Admiral Harrison interrupted gently. "However, I'm also aware that Miss Martinez has not been formally charged with anything yet. Please remove the handcuffs." Sarah felt relief flood through her as the metal restraints were unlocked and removed. She rubbed her sore wrists, grateful for the first kindness she had experienced since her arrest. Admiral Harrison returned to his seat and opened a folder on his desk. "Miss Martinez, I've been reviewing your case personally. The evidence against you is indeed concerning. A witness places someone of your description near the computer center, and security footage appears to show a woman in a red jacket accessing restricted areas." Sarah's heart sank. Even the Admiral believed she was guilty. "However," he continued, "there are some inconsistencies that trouble me. The timing doesn't quite match, for one thing, and the person on the security footage seems to know exactly where to go, suggesting familiarity with our base layout." "Sir, I've never been on this base before today," Sarah said earnestly. "I don't know anything about computer centers or restricted areas. I serve drinks at Murphy's Bar, that's all I do." Admiral Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me about Friday night at the bar, everything you remember." For the next hour, Sarah recounted every detail she could recall from that evening. Admiral Harrison listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about specific times or customers. He seemed particularly interested when she mentioned the businessman who sat in the corner reading his newspaper. "This businessman," Admiral Harrison said, "can you describe him in more detail?" Sarah closed her eyes, trying to visualize the man clearly. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a dark suit. He had short brown hair and was very quiet. He ordered scotch on the rocks and left a $20 tip on a $15 tab. "Did he seem familiar with the area, like a local resident?" "No, definitely not a local. I know most of our regular customers, and I'd never seen him before. He seemed like he might be visiting for business. Admiral Harrison made some notes in his folder. Miss Martinez, would you mind if I asked you to remove your jacket, just temporarily? Sarah looked confused, but slipping off her denim jacket and placing it on the chair beside her. She was wearing a simple white t-shirt underneath. Admiral Harrison's eyes immediately focused on her left shoulder, where a small tattoo was visible through the thin fabric of her shirt. Miss Martinez, would you mind showing me your tattoo? Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. She had gotten the tattoo 3 years earlier during a difficult period in her life, and she often forgot it was there. Hesitantly, she pulled down the shoulder of her t-shirt to reveal the design. The tattoo was small but intricate, an anchor surrounded by rope with the words underneath in elegant script. Admiral Harrison stared at it for a long moment, his expression changing from professional interest to something closer to surprise. Miss Martinez, he said quietly, where did you get this tattoo? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. It was for my brother. He was a Marine. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan before. She couldn't finish the sentence. Admiral Harrison leaned forward in his chair. Before what, Miss Martinez? Tears began to form in Sarah's eyes. Before he was killed by a roadside bomb 3 years ago, the tattoo was my way of honoring his memory. He always said the Marines and Navy were like family, fighting for the same cause. The Admiral was silent for a long moment, studying the tattoo and Sarah's emotional reaction. Finally, he spoke in a voice filled with respect. What was your brother's full name and unit? Martinez, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Sarah replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Admiral Harrison turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. After a few minutes, he found what he was looking for. Corporal Martinez, killed in action September 15th, 3 years ago while providing cover for evacuating civilians. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. Sarah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Admiral Harrison stood and walked around his desk to stand beside her chair. Miss Martinez, your brother was a hero. His actions that day saved the lives of 12 Afghan children and their teacher. I knew his commanding officer personally. He returned to his seat and picked up his phone. Get me Lieutenant Colonel at camp, he said to whoever answered. While they waited for the call to go through, Admiral Harrison studied Sarah's face with new interest. Miss Martinez, I've been in the military for 40 years. I've learned to read people, to judge character. Everything about you tells me you're telling the truth about Friday night. The phone rang and Admiral Harrison answered immediately. Pete, it's Admiral Harrison. I need you to verify some information about one of your Marines. Yes, Corporal Martinez, KIA 3 years ago. I see. And his family. A sister named Sarah, that's correct. Thank you, Pete. He hung up the phone and looked directly at Sarah. Miss Martinez, Lieutenant Colonel remembers your brother well. He also remembers you from the memorial service. He said you were the young woman who stood by the flag during the entire ceremony, never shedding a tear until they played taps. Sarah nodded, remembering that day all too clearly. Admiral Harrison opened another file on his desk. Miss Martinez, I'm going to share something with you that might explain what's really happening here. We believe the person who broke into our computer center on Friday night was not acting alone. Someone with inside knowledge helped plan this theft. He showed her a photograph from the security footage. The image was grainy, but it clearly showed a woman in a red jacket near the computer center. Look closely at this image, Miss Martinez. What do you notice? Sarah studied the photograph carefully. The woman looks like me from a distance, but her hair is different. Mine curls naturally, but hers looks straight, and she seems taller. Exactly, Admiral Harrison said with satisfaction. We believe someone specifically chose a person who resembled you to carry out this theft. The question is why. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone wanted me to be blamed for this. It's possible, or perhaps they simply needed someone who matched your general description to throw off the investigation. Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair. Miss Martinez, your brother's sacrifice means something to me personally. I knew many Marines who served with him, and they all spoke of his integrity and courage. Those qualities often run in families. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. I'm going to do something that might be considered unusual. I'm going to personally oversee the rest of this investigation, and I'm going to make sure you're released immediately. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Sir, are you saying I can go home?" Admiral Harrison turned back to face her. "Miss Martinez, your brother died defending the values this country stands for. The least I can do is make sure his sister receives the justice she deserves. Agent Collins, please prepare the paperwork for Miss Martinez's immediate release." Agent Collins looked surprised but nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir. Should I inform the FBI that the investigation is continuing?" "Absolutely. In fact, I want a full task force assembled by tomorrow morning. We're going to find the real criminals and make sure they face appropriate consequences." As Sarah put her jacket back on, Admiral Harrison approached her one final time. "Miss Martinez, I want you to know that your brother's service was not forgotten. His name is on the memorial wall at camp, and his story is told to new recruits as an example of Marine Corps values." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Admiral. Would have been proud to know someone like you cared about the truth." "Miss Martinez, it's people like your family who make this country worth defending. I'm honored to have met you." As they prepared to leave the Admiral's office, Sarah couldn't help but think about how dramatically her situation had changed in just a few hours. The small tattoo she had got to honor her brother's memory had somehow become the key to her freedom. 2 days after her release, Sarah Martinez found herself sitting in the same interrogation room where her nightmare had begun. But this time the circumstances were completely different. Admiral Harrison had personally assembled a task force of FBI agents, naval investigators, and computer forensics experts to find the real criminals behind the base security breach. Detective, the same man who had questioned her so aggressively before, now looked embarrassed as he brought her a cup of coffee and apologized for the treatment she had received. "Miss Martinez, I want you to know that we're doing everything possible to catch the people responsible for this setup." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "Detective, I understand you were just doing your job. I don't hold any grudges." Agent Collins entered the room carrying several folders and a laptop computer. Her attitude towards Sarah had changed completely since Admiral Harrison's intervention. "Miss Martinez, we've made significant progress in the investigation, and we need your help to identify some people." Over the past 48 hours, the task force had discovered that the theft was much more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized. The real criminals had spent weeks studying Sarah's routine, learning about her work schedule, and even following her to see what she wore and how she styled her hair. "It appears they specifically targeted you as a scapegoat," Agent Collins explained, opening her laptop to show security footage from various locations around town. "Look at these images from the week before the theft." The footage showed Sarah going about her normal daily activities, walking to the coffee shop, heading to work at Murphy's bar, shopping at the grocery store. But in several of the videos, a woman could be seen in the background, watching Sarah from a distance and even taking photographs with a small camera. "This woman was studying you," Agent Collins continued, pointing to the figure in the footage. "She learned your routines, your appearance, even purchased clothing similar to what you typically wear." Sarah felt a chill as she realized how thoroughly she had been watched without knowing it. "But why me? Why would someone go to all this trouble to frame me specifically?" Detective answered that question. "Because you're perfect for their needs. You have no military background, no criminal record, no obvious motive for stealing classified information. If their plan had worked, everyone would have assumed you were just an innocent person hired by someone else to carry out the theft." The investigation had revealed that the real mastermind behind the operation was someone with extensive inside knowledge of the naval base. Using advanced computer analysis, the forensics team had discovered that the stolen information required access codes that only a limited number of people possessed. Admiral Harrison entered the room, carrying a cup of coffee and looking more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen him. "Miss Martinez, I have some news that I think you'll find interesting. We've identified our primary suspect." He placed a photograph on the table showing a man in his 40s wearing a naval uniform. Sarah recognized him immediately as the businessman who had been sitting quietly in the corner of Murphy's bar on Friday night. "His name is Lieutenant Commander Bradley Foster," Admiral Harrison explained. "He's been stationed at our base for 2 years, working in the Computer Systems Division. He had access to all the information that was stolen." Sarah stared at the photograph in amazement. He was at the bar Friday night, but he was dressed in civilian clothes. He seemed so quiet and normal. That was part of his alibi, Agent Collins said. While you were serving him drinks and dozens of people saw him there, his accomplice was breaking into the computer center wearing clothing that matched your description. If anyone questioned his whereabouts, he could point to all the witnesses who saw him at the bar. The plan had been brilliant in its simplicity. Foster knew that security cameras around the base would capture his accomplice during the theft, so he needed someone to take the blame. Sarah's regular routine and distinctive red jacket made her the perfect target. His accomplice is a woman named Jennifer, Admiral Harrison continued, showing Sarah another photograph. She's a former military contractor with extensive knowledge of base security systems. She's the one who actually carried out the theft while Foster established his alibi at your bar. Sarah studied Jennifer's picture carefully. The woman had similar height and hair color to Sarah, but with enough differences that someone who knew Sarah well would never confuse them. However, on grainy security footage taken from a distance, the resemblance was close enough to fool investigators. "How did you catch them?" Sarah asked. Detective smiled for the first time since she had met him. "Your tattoo was actually the key to solving everything. When Admiral Harrison realized you were the sister of a decorated Marine, he became personally invested in proving your innocence. He ordered a much more thorough investigation than we might have conducted otherwise." The breakthrough had come when computer forensics experts analyzed the timing of the theft more carefully. The security footage showed the thief accessing computer terminals with remarkable efficiency, suggesting extensive familiarity with the system layout. This level of expertise could only come from someone with inside knowledge. "We also discovered that Foster had been in financial trouble," Agent Collins added. "He owed substantial gambling debts to some very dangerous people. The stolen information was apparently payment for those debts. Over the past 24 hours, both Foster and had been arrested. Foster was taken into custody at his home on the base, while was captured at a hotel 2 towns away where she had been hiding since the theft." Admiral Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "Miss Martinez, I want to personally apologize for everything you've been through. The system failed you, and that's unacceptable." Sarah shook her head. "Admiral Harrison, you're the one who fixed the system. Without your intervention, I might still be sitting in a federal holding cell." "Perhaps, but that's not the point. An innocent person should never have to endure what you experienced." Admiral Harrison paused thoughtfully. "Miss Martinez, I'd like to make you an offer." Sarah looked at him curiously. "The naval base is opening a new community liaison position. We need someone to help build better relationships between the military and civilian communities in this area. The job would involve organizing events, facilitating communication, and helping people understand what we do here." Sarah was speechless. A job offer was the last thing she had expected. Admiral Harrison continued. "The position pays well, includes excellent benefits, and would allow you to honor your brother's memory by building bridges between military and civilian communities. What do you think?" Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes again. "Admiral Harrison, I don't know what to say. That sounds like an amazing opportunity." "Think about it," he said gently. "There's no pressure to decide immediately. After everything you've been through, you deserve time to consider your options." Agent Collins gathered her files and prepared to leave. "Miss Martinez, the FBI will be filing formal charges against Foster and within the next few days. You may be called to testify at their trial, but you're completely cleared of all wrongdoing." As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on the incredible turn her life had taken. Just a week earlier, she had been a simple bartender living a quiet life. Now, she was being offered a chance to build a meaningful career while honoring her brother's sacrifice. Detective walked her out of the police station, the same route she had taken in handcuffs just 3 days earlier. "Miss Martinez, I want you to know that this case taught me an important lesson about jumping to conclusions. I promise to be more careful in future investigations." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "Detective, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that the truth eventually came out." Outside the police station, Admiral Harrison was waiting beside a naval staff car. "Miss Martinez, if you're ready, I'd like to take you back to the base for a proper tour. I think seeing our community programs might help you understand what the liaison position would involve." During the drive back to the naval base, Sarah watched the familiar coastal scenery with new eyes. Everything looked different now that she wasn't seeing it through the windows of a police car. The base tour was extensive and impressive. Admiral Harrison introduced her to dozens of personnel, from young sailors just beginning their careers to seasoned officers with decades of experience. Everyone she met was professional, dedicated, and genuinely committed to serving their country. They visited the base schools where military children received education, the medical facilities that served both military families and some civilian emergencies, and the community center where various programs brought together service members and local residents. This is what the liaison position would help expand, Admiral Harrison explained as they watched a group of local high school students touring a naval engineering facility. We want to build stronger connections with the community, help people understand that we're not just a military installation, but neighbors and fellow citizens. Sarah could see the potential in such a role. Growing up as the sister of a Marine, she understood both civilian and military perspectives. She knew how important it was for communities to support their service members, and she also knew how much the military wanted to be good neighbors. As the day ended, Admiral Harrison walked with her to the base's memorial wall, where the names of local service members who had died in the line of duty were engraved in black granite. His name was there, along with dozens of others. "Miss Martinez, your brother's sacrifice represents the best of military service," Admiral Harrison said quietly. "He died protecting innocent people, living the values that make our country worth defending." Sarah touched her brother's name on the wall, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since his death. He would have loved knowing that his sister had the chance to work with people like you. "Does that mean you're accepting the position?" Admiral Harrison asked with a smile. Sarah looked around at the base, the harbor, the flag flying proudly in the evening breeze, and then back at her brother's name on the memorial wall. "Yes, Admiral Harrison, I accept." 6 months later, Sarah Martinez was thriving in her new role as community liaison for the naval base. She had organized successful programs that brought together military families and local residents, created educational opportunities for area students, and helped build understanding between the base and surrounding communities. The trial of Lieutenant Commander Foster and Jennifer had concluded with both defendants receiving lengthy prison sentences. Foster was also dishonorably discharged from the Navy and forfeited all military benefits. Sarah's small apartment now overlooked the naval base instead of just the harbor, and she had developed friendships with many of the service members and their families. Her experience of being falsely accused had given her a unique perspective on justice and the importance of fighting for truth. On the anniversary of his death, Admiral Harrison joined Sarah at the memorial wall for a special ceremony honoring all fallen service members. As they stood together in respectful silence, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed because of a small tattoo and one man's commitment to doing what was right. The tattoo on her shoulder, which had once been simply a private tribute to her brother's memory, had become something much more significant. It had saved her from injustice, connected her to a community of people dedicated to service, and ultimately led her to a career that honored sacrifice every single day. As the sun set over the harbor, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Sarah touched the anchor tattoo through her uniform shirt and whispered a quiet thank you to the brother who continued to watch over her, even in death.